Hey everybody, welcome to the Conversations in Groove podcast. I'm Benji Johnson and I'm going to be your host. You might ask yourself, what are Conversations in Groove? Heck, I don't know, but we're going to find out the whole season what they are. We're going to find out what your groove is and what some of my really cool friends' grooves are. Is it music? Is it TV and film? Do they act? Or do they just listen to records with a deep groove to them? Well, we're going to find out all season long. I got some really cool people coming up and some really big episodes coming up. So prepare yourself for the Conversations in Groove podcast right here live from Earthtones Recording Studios. Okay, so technically, welcome to Conversations in Groove podcast, episode 1. Donna with my good buddy, the ubiquitous.
Ubiquity.
That's the biggest word I know.
That's good because it's everywhere.
As are you, my friend.
My ribs, please stop. We're meta, already meta, going down a meta hole.
So this is my good friend, Charlie Hunter. And Charlie Hunter has become my good friend because he moved to our fair town of Greensboro. And I still haven't figured out how or why or how that dropped out of the sky. We talk about
Witness protection.
So your path to Greensboro in a really quick, like 5-point general way. You were born and raised in...
Well, it's a long story. I mean, I led up, born in Rhode Island, but we lived on a school bus in the hippie days and did that whole thing and the commune thing for a while. And eventually I grew up in Berkeley. If anyone wants to know about that life or what it's like, a friend of mine named Clayne Hayward wrote a great book called The Hypocrisy of Disco, which I highly recommend if you want to know how people like us get to be such misanthropic folk. My wife and I, we were in New York and then we moved to Jersey, 2 kids, and we just had enough, and so we knew people in the area, in the Triangle and in the Triad down here, some folks near Asheville, and I've always liked North Carolina. And my wife, we almost lived in Winston, but my wife and the kids were driving through Greensboro and they stopped for lunch and she looked around and she said, okay, this is the place we need to move. Because the funny thing is, it looks a lot like where I grew up in the Bay Area, in the East Bay. It's all the same kind of houses.
That's cool.
And it immediately kind of felt like at home, and it's been pretty cool. And especially now with the last year, I basically have not really gone more than a mile radius from my house. I've gotten to know it pretty well.
I swear, man, as a lot of people.
Yeah.
So speaking of that, how has the last year been for you as far as, I mean, I know it's been a lot for everybody.
Yeah.
How has it been for you as far as, we've all had to adapt in a certain way.
Yeah.
In a big way. But how have you adapted as opposed to what your normal routine is as Charlie Hunter?
Well, for the last 30 years, I've pretty much just done laps around the country and even the world in a lot of ways on planes, but around the country in a van, flying to Europe, Japan, wherever, doing this constant touring thing. And I never had a chance to ever question why I was doing what I was doing, because you get in that kind of a vortex, and you have to just keep going. It's like the hamster wheel. If you stop, you die, Right. So, but then I realized, that's a long time. And we're musicians. We make lemonade. We course correct and we make lemonade. That's what we essentially do.
Yeah.
And, it just gave me a chance to learn a bunch of new skills, namely recording myself. Then that put me in a position of being able to record instruments that I don't usually do. I spent a lot of time working on some drumming and, of course, playing bass and guitar, which I've done, you have to do to be able to play this instrument. So I've been able to just make a living doing that, and then a bunch of other things. And it also showed me that I don't have to be on the road. So now that things are opening up again, I'm able to be a little more judicious about how I do that. And also you get to a point where you're just like, I can't drive around the world doing all of these gigs, which honestly, when you're the band leader, you're losing money most of the time, to be perfectly honest. Unless you're one of the guys, which I'm not one of the guys, you're
Right.
going to be losing money. So it allowed me to do almost a ton of things that I never would have had a chance to do in the first place. So for me, as awful as the macro thing is, and as awful as it has been for many friends of mine who don't have the circumstances of living somewhere like Greensboro, where it's relatively affordable for a musician, for me in my own micro universe, it's actually been a really great opportunity,
That's
to
good,
be
man.
able to kind of reinvent, I guess. And I'm sure many people have done the same thing.
Yeah, and I know that and I heard somebody recently. It's funny that you said that about the fact of how much you lose when you're out doing it. Not necessarily lose, but how
You're
much
exposed.
Yeah, well, and
You're exposed.
and
You're
you
very
have
exposed.
to when you're out traveling. What people don't realize is that you have to pay the band. You have to put gas in the van or the truck or whatever it is. You
Yeah.
have to pay for plane flights. You have to pay for motel, and you can
Yeah.
try and work that all into your fees and everything like that. But when you're not out, I think you and I were talking about this last week, or I heard somebody talking about it maybe on another podcast or something, but they were talking about the fact of until you're forced to not do that, you don't realize how much money is outgoing just to keep you out.
Oh yeah, and not only that, but a lot of what I did because I felt like a certain honor and integrity was involved, and it was important for me to play all of the much smaller areas because I felt like they needed music sometimes more than the bigger areas did.
Yeah.
And they didn't always lose money. Sometimes they did better than the big areas, obviously, but the whole thing was get the music to the people first. And unfortunately, and I wouldn't have done it any differently. If I wanted to make money in this business, I would have made many, many choices that I would have made different choices.
Right.
But, there comes a point where you no longer really have the physical resources, the spiritual resources to actually just you're looking at I'm the driver,
Right.
and
Right.
I'm pretty good at what I do as a musician, you know what I mean? But I'm also, a good driver and tour manager, and I do all of these things. The music is something you do for the smallest portion of the day.
Yeah.
If you're not asleep, you're working. There
Yeah.
is no other point. You're driving, you're unloading, you're dealing with your merch, you're dealing with the promoters, and now with social media, which is something that gives as much as it takes away. It gives you an enormous platform, but it takes away a lot of your time, and you have more responsibility because the promoters expect you to be really vigilant about promoting every gig.
Right.
So if you have a gig let's say you have a gig in a great gig like Evanston, a place called Space. They're kicking butt, they're doing their thing, but you have to spend the whole day. Let's say you're driving from your gig before was in St. Louis. Yeah, that's a little far. Let's say your gig before was in Indianapolis. You're getting up at 8 a.m. You're driving to Evanston the entire time. Maybe you're doing an interview. While you're driving, you're also having to field calls, and then you're, for instance, like with Lucy Woodward, she would be in the shotgun seat, do this post, put this, do that. You're constantly working the whole time, and then you're ordering your merch to be flown from here to there. You get to the gig, you're pretty tired. You show up, you do your sound check, you maybe have time to eat, then you do the hit, then you sell your merch after. You pack up all your gear, move it into your car. Then you go and find where your hotel or your Airbnb is. And by this time, you're midnight, 1 in the morning, and you repeat the same thing the next day. And I'll say all that to say that it's a blessing to be able to get to do that,
Right.
And I've been around the best people, but you're exposed economically. If gas prices go up precipitously, you take that hit. Hotel prices go up, you take that hit. If a bunch of gigs get canceled, you take that hit.
Right.
If, for instance, what happened with us at the very beginning of the pandemic when we were here recording,
I watched
we
it
had to
happen in real time.
decide we're going to cancel. China just canceled, and we have these gigs in Japan, which were really predicated on going to China, and they had all of their economic, we were going to lose $2,000 just getting on the airplane to fly 19 hours or whatever it was. And you always try to keep your you always try to keep your dates, and you really don't want to let promoters down, and you know how much they've worked to promote a gig for you, and how much goes into that. But there comes a certain point where you have to make that call, and so it's like, how do you want to lose money? Do you want to lose money flying all halfway around the world, or you want to lose money not flying halfway around the world and into this whole pandemic thing, which was starting, which we didn't understand what was going to happen, but at that time we just made the choice to do that. But long story short, you're just very exposed as a band leader, and if you're not super vigilant and you're not making moves that are always making you money, you're even more exposed. And because of the way that I wanted to lead my life as a musician, which I always thought the integrity of what you're playing, making sure that the people in your band get paid first, basically making sure everyone else gets paid first and taken care of first, making sure the music is first, and making sure that the audience is also respected.
Totally.
So that doesn't allow you, because most of the industry doesn't work that way. So when you decide to do it that way, you really put yourself in for a lot of exposure. And I'm proud to have done it that way for 30 years, but I can't really afford to do it that way any longer. And that means that I probably don't want to do most of the things anymore, because they'll force me into a position to either have to do something that I feel lacks the integrity that it needs to have, or I'll end up potentially losing a lot more money.
And also like getting into all the details of what you just talked about. We could talk for 3 hours about just literally the details of that. I think that the general public, when they see you, like you said, you look at your 24-hour day when you're on the road, and you look at the hour and a half or hour set that you play.
Yeah.
That's what they think happens all day.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, and why wouldn't they?
It's all the glamour, and it's all that, because it's never really shown to them. Like your schedule, if you wrote it out on paper, which a lot of times is literally written out hour by hour. I got press at 2 with
15 minutes by 15 minutes a lot of the time.
Exactly. And if they saw that and said, no, that guy's not really doing that. They look at all the stuff and go like, oh, catering, look, they're eating for free, and that's all the things that, like, in a general public, sense, that a lot of people see, and all they see is what's really, all they see is like the glitz and glamour, if there is any of that, in reality of what you're doing and when you're doing, the set, and all those details that you just talked about. Yeah. They totally get lost, because they add up to, it's like a lot of friends of mine, that, you hear people talk about, like, addiction with musicians and stuff like that. And it's like, it's not the 2 hours you're on stage, it's the other 22 hours that become the problem. Right. And the thing is, when you look at you guys running your whole show, and I was amazed at that when we did, and we'll have to kind of go backwards and talk about this record that we did. We did a record in here a year ago, January. And so you guys came in to do that record in here, and it was the first inklings of COVID around the world. It was in China. It was in China at the time, and it was a thing.
We had gigs coming up in China.
Yeah, and you guys had a China-Japan tour planned, and then literally as you were walking in the door, you were maintaining that situation, walking into a recording session.
Sure.
Maintaining that situation on your phones, you and Lucy talking back and forth about it, and the amount of details that I overheard that went into that, which I, overheard what I did, but I couldn't tell you what those details were. But still, the amount of detail that went into all of that, and the thought that went into it, and the fact that and you're also on the hook, not only financially for that stuff, but you're on the hook for the sort of the wreckage that's left behind of, people who wanted to go to the shows.
Yeah, people who wanted to go to the shows, and also, the promoters and the club owners, they're not in this to make a lot of money. They're working their asses off. And especially the smaller clubs that are these real mom and pop operations, a lot of them are. And you're talking about people that are sleeping 4 hours a night, and they're doing everything. They love music, and they want, and yeah, sure, they'll have a night where they sell out and they do great, but then they'll have another night where they offer more than they should have offered to a band that comes and doesn't sell enough tickets, did not do enough to promote the show, and they're left holding the bag.
Yeah.
And the band is on to the next thing. So it's equally difficult for them.
Right. Right. And I think it's cool because out of a lot of the people that I do get a chance to observe and sometimes work with, you are one of those guys that I observe being, like you said, it's about the music first, but you will go to smaller areas and play. It's like you're really about taking what you do, and instead of making it this exclusive thing that people can't get to, you make it as accessible to the public as you can with places that you play, with things that you do, making sure that it's not only, you've done a lot of local shows here.
Sure.
And that's the thing, is it's not this thing of, oh, this is just where I live, I don't play here. And to me, it's like, I realize that, and again, meeting you and knowing you now and watching that, I think it's pretty amazing to see that you're like that, and apparently have been this way the whole time, and you just never see anything from here, from when you're not living here.
Point.
You only see what the what the press puts out and all that stuff. So
it's also different. The ethos that I come from is that of someone who grew up on a school bus and communes and around music all the time, and I was a street musician.
Right.
And if you're a street musician, throw down now.
Right.
No, not
exactly.
No, now. Pick it up and play. And if no one stops, you don't eat. So it's like, that's the ethos. So I don't care, man. We played with Lucy. We played a gig at the Albert Hall, and it was cool. It was a big gig with a lot of people, but it wasn't the best gig I ever did. I don't even really remember much of it. It was just a big gig that you could say you do. I do remember playing on the street in Paris in 1987 with a huge crowd of people because the vibe was so insane. Yeah. I remember that way higher in my mind than I remember what happened at Royal Albert Hall. Yeah. And that's not to denigrate that. I'm just saying that you should never, my feeling, not you, but I feel like I always want to feel like I'm only as good as my last gig. There's none, I don't want to, and you can change what you think is important in your playing or what you want. That's always going to be changing. You're always going to be working on that. But you should always, my feeling is just like, look, man, if you just told me now, like, look, man, the only gigs you're going to be doing are within a 100-mile radius of your home for the rest of your life, I'll be like, cool, no problem.
Yeah,
I'm down. I'm down. I can still work on my craft and hopefully get my ass kicked by younger musicians and older musicians, help younger musicians learn. That's all. I've done all that other stuff. It's not, I don't have a need for that. But on the other hand, for instance, it's if it presents itself by dint of just the universe, then you do it. You don't hate on it just because it's it. You know, but it's also it's no more. Just for me to say the Royal Albert Hall, to me personally, and I know this will sound sacrilegious to people, but I'm a street musician. It's no more important for me, or it's no more validating for me than playing on the One, or playing, just taking an acoustic guitar and playing on the street corner here, or going to a local laundromat and just playing. Yeah. No more validating for me. It's exactly. How are you being a part of the continuum of musicians going back thousands of years, you
Right.
know?
Right.
How are you being a very tiny, infinitesimally small part of that? And
Right.
that to me is more important than all of the other stuff. I mean, and I can say that because I've done all the other stuff.
Right.
You know what I mean?
And
And I don't mean that from an egotistical bragging thing. I've just been lucky enough to have been in situations where I could experience that stuff, so I can have it as an example to myself.
You and
in
I
the grand
talked about
scheme of things,
You talked to
know.
me about that too in the past, which I think is really cool. So that, I mean, and that what you're talking about actually plays into the whole thing that you're talking about, which was amazing to me because you're talking about Royal Albert Hall. Like, I know you guys go over and you play Europe shows and stuff like that. I don't pay attention to where you play necessarily, but it's cool to me that, like you were saying, you literally played Royal Albert Hall, and probably the next week or two later, you did a show at On the One.
Yeah, or even
and
next week later, we played like a restaurant gig in southern Italy.
Right.
Like, really,
Right.
it was just a restaurant gig.
Right.
Honestly, it was like playing...
with nobody showing up to
No.
pay because Charlie Hunter's there. It's just a restaurant gig.
Just well, no, I mean they were, because it was me and Lucy, but the gig
Right.
was just in a restaurant, you know.
And the other thing too, man, is that like you talk about seeing all those things, and I know one of the things that you talked about to me that we've talked about is the tour that you did with U2. Which was I was like, really? Like, and man, I mean, I'd swear, you and I talk, and every time I talk to you, it's one of these other things. You're like, hey man, do you know that guy? You know, like, and then just drop somebody's, and you're not name dropping, they're just friends of yours, you know, and I just go, yeah, and I have no idea of like people that you've worked with or
Yeah.
anything like that, which is fine. But that's the funny thing is you were talking to me about that U2 tour. And that was, and you were playing at that time with
The Disposable Heroes of Hypocrisy. Michael Franti, many
Which is
people may
so
know
cool.
Michael.
Yeah, man. And to me, seeing that, and it was a massive tour.
Massive. It was like football stadiums.
And you explained to me that what you learned from that tour
Was what I never wanted to do that for a living.
exactly.
I never, but not to say that, I mean, honestly, this is like 1990, maybe 91 at the latest. That was an incredible production. In terms of like theatrical.
And which tour was that?
Zoo TV it was called. In terms of like theatrical, just incredible productions where you just have this massive amount of people on your crew. Everyone is pulling together to make this show happen. And
Right.
it was, I mean, astonishing, the amount of...
Now, how many people were in your, like, that band?
Well, our band was we just did this our show, you know, and it wasn't my band. It was Michael and Rano's band. And
Right,
it was
but I'm
just
saying
four of
how many
us.
people? It's just four of you.
Well, four of us, and then we had a road manager and kind of a merch guy. And sometimes there was a friend that would come along to do the other stuff.
But I'm saying while you're on this stage, that's probably the size of half of a football field.
Right. It was
There's
massive.
four of you.
Yeah.
You know.
But Rano and Michael's thing, again, it was not, I was just a very small part of something that was about this gigantic show. And the Disposable Heroes show was a spectacle.
Yeah.
You know, Michael's a really tall, handsome dude. Rano's this medium height, chiseled guy who was an incredible dancer, and they made all these metal sculptures that they would bang on and make sparks fly. I mean, it was intense. It was an
that's cool.
intense show. And Simone, who was the drummer, and I, we just were really kind of in the background, just playing. And I'd switch off between bass and guitar and my 7-string instrument at the time. But you know, it's a whole different thing, and that's not what I wanted to do with my life. I really wanted to get a lot better at music and playing guitar.
Right.
And those guys were not going to afford me that because by their own admission, they weren't really musicians in that sense. You know, they were incredible performers, but he's
a really creative guy.
Oh yeah,
like, I mean,
totally.
I've read some articles with him in like Tape Op, you know, and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And when you mentioned his name, I didn't even realize he was the guy from Disposable Heroes. You mentioned his name, and I was like, yeah, I've read it. I've read, and then it all kind of clicked.
Brilliant.
And I was like,
He's a brilliant dude. And I mean, we made that Hypocrisy record like more than 30 years ago, come to think of it. I mean, we were
How
kids.
many did you do with them?
Just one. I think I'm on a record of his called Spearhead 2. I think I played some on that.
Yeah.
Because I think there was some carryover from Hypocrisy. But I left Hypocrisy after that tour, immediately after that tour, because I had just had enough. It was time for me to kind of move on with my life.
I hear you. Oh, okay. So you mentioned your 7-string instrument during that time. Let's talk about your guitar.
Sure.
And how I know that you're a teacher, and this is crazy, man, because I know that when I heard of you the first time was in a guitar magazine. I was the kid that bought the guitar magazines every month and read through all the guitar magazines.
I was the kid that went to my library and just sat in the library looking at all the guitar and all the music magazines,
And so I would get the guitar magazines every month, and I would go through them, and I'd say I was probably maybe 22, something like that. And I remember reading an article with Les Claypool, and Les was in a magazine, and they had a really big record that had come out, and they asked him, they said, since you seem to be on the cutting edge of everything, so in other words, everything that you put out is a little bit different than what you did before, and you seem to push these boundaries, what are you listening to, and what is boundary pushing to you? And he said, there's this kid, and he plays an 8-string guitar.
Oh, wow.
And I was like, and he said, but it's not a heavy metal. That was at the time that, a lot of these like really heavy bands had come out, and they had 7 strings and things like that. And they were using like the Steve Vai 7-string guitars to play really heavy stuff.
Right.
And he had to explain, he said, but it's not like heavy metal 7 or 8-string guitar. He said, this guy plays jazz and he plays bass and guitar simultaneously, and his name's Charlie Hunter. And I was like, what in the hell can that be all about? And I swear, man, that's the first time I ever remember seeing your name was in that interview. And then when you and I met, you talked about doing your first record with Les.
Yeah. Yep.
And that was in
93, I think.
Wow.
Yeah. So Les,
so that was before Hypocrisy.
No, it was after.
It was after.
Yeah. And the reason I met Les, crazy thing is we lived in the same area, but the Bay Area then it was a big place, and there were so many different circles of musicians. But his original drummer was a guy named Jay Lane, who I have known since we were kids and has always been the baddest MF since we were kids. He and Dave Ellis, who we had a trio together, which was a trio we recorded the first record for Les, and also the Blue Note record called Bing Bing Bing. That was our trio.
Right.
Now Jay had played in Les's band Primus, previous to a guy named Herb. Who played in it, who's a good dude, and so. But we were on the road when we were doing that U2 tour. Hypocrisy and then Primus was next.
They opened after you guys left the tour?
No.
Not left the tour,
but... So we were the opener, and then they were the second band.
Oh, shut up. They were on the tour with you?
Yeah, and
I had
then
no
U2.
idea.
So we ended up doing a lot of hanging out. And we played together a bunch because it was boring, man, honestly. It was just, you really had to find musical opportunities for yourself. So we hung out with those dudes a lot, which was great. And Les has always been like a super mensch dude. Like he always... has kind of tried to create opportunities for people that he likes. And so he was starting a label and asked if we wanted to record on his label. And I was like, yeah, sure. And at that point, Dave and Jay and I were playing 4 or 5 gigs a week, I think, in the Bay Area, just alone, just constantly playing. Right. And so he gave us the opportunity. We recorded in his basement too. He had a really cool tape thing set up, and he's got great ears, man, and he's got a great mind too. So he kind of did that kind of solid for us. And the crazy thing is, which is totally unheard of, it was called Prawn Song Records.
It was his label,
his
right?
label. And years later, I don't know, about 10 years ago, he just called me up. He's like, dude, I'm sending you something in the mail. I was like, oh, okay, cool. And I get the DAT tape, the master tape. And I was just like, I didn't understand. I was like, well, what should I do with this? He goes, no, that's yours. I'm giving you back your masters. You now own your masters for this record. Unheard of.
That's crazy.
Nobody does that.
Right.
Nobody
Right.
does that ever, so.
Well, because labels and like explaining that to, like if people are listening or watching or whatever, like explaining that to people is basically a label deal goes, we're going to cut you We're going to cut you in advance, which is basically, a loan
Yeah.
from us. We're the bank. And in return for you paying us back all that, we own this recording forever and ever, or however long our contract is.
Yeah. True.
And so what happens is labels like, the majors and all that stuff, they own all these recordings from 40 or 50 years ago. And when they become something that people want to hear, they're still making money, in perpetuity off these things, because that was the deal they did.
Absolutely.
So for him to actually
huge.
have a label deal with you,
huge.
even though it was his label has gotten to be pretty large, man.
Oh, I mean, is it the same one? He put stuff out on that label?
He still releases the stuff with like
cool.
Sean Lennon on that, I think.
Great. That's great.
Because I don't think he would have ever gone to I mean, running his own label, I don't think he would have gone to
the thing is, he could have stood to make tens of dollars off of my record, man.
Right. I'm going to send you
Tens
this.
of
I'm
dollars.
going to send you this DAT back, and it's probably worth less than the postage.
Exactly. Yeah, totally.
But did you ever? I know when you and I first talked, and you had told me that he had sent you the masters. Did you ever re-release that record?
Well, it's funny you say that. I'm the people who administer my publishing, Round Hill Music. They're actually going to release it.
Cool.
So they're going to re-release that record with warts and all. There's a lot of embarrassing playing by yours truly on it.
Oh,
But
please.
I was
I'm sure.
I don't know, 24 years old or something like that. So have pity.
Well, I mean, it's funny, man. I remember one of the first times that we talked, and you had made a visit over here. We sat and listened. And that was one of the funniest things I remember about you is we had something to listen to that I had recorded for you, and we listened for like 30 seconds, and you were like, "Yeah, man, that sounds cool. You like James Brown?" And then we just started listening to music, and so we were talking about that record, and you said, "No, just go to YouTube and pull it up. I'll show you how horrible it is." And we were listening to it, and you and I were both like, That's not bad. That's actually really good, man.
Oh, which record was it?
The first one.
Oh, really? Oh, yeah. Well, it's got vibe. I mean, look, man, you're only young once, and you can only have that young person's vibe once. And so, you're going to be intense. You're going to speed things up. You can really feel the testosterone or estrogen, however it may be, and the zits, and you could feel the like intensity, like you're ready to scale the castle wall and let the siege commence kind of vibe. But
That's
I mean,
funny,
it's just
man.
standard for young. So you got to give yourself a break when you're a young musician, and you got to give yourself a break as you become an older musician, because it's really. If I was going to play the stuff I played when I was 25, that'd just be silly. You know what I mean? It just doesn't make any sense.
So the jumping from that, and I don't mean to jump across all the other stuff that you've
all
done.
good.
You've just done so much cool stuff, man. And it's like, and if anybody wants to, witness to that, like, you got to just turn on Spotify or Apple Music or anything, and just type in this guy's name, or say his name into your phone, or say his name into
go to your
Alexa.
local flea market and find some cassette tapes.
Cassettes, yeah, right. And so, and there's so much stuff, and that's the coolest thing to me, man, is that you switch gears really like on the fly. And I mean, I watch you do it in a short amount of time, like switching gears with ensembles that you play with what your playing situation is. And I know that recently you've gotten up with Sam, and Sam I've known Sam since he was a kid, since he's like 14.
Sam Freibush.
Sam Freibush.
Hammond organist.
Yeah. And so he's got this trio with you now where you're just playing guitar.
Sure. Yeah.
And it's not your thing.
No.
And that's amazing to me, man, that you shift that gear like that. And I mean, it's not that obviously if you play this, it's not that you forget how to play guitar, but playing guitar or playing bass and a thing like that, it's like your mind and how it works together with your instrument is I watch it and I can't, I just look and I just go, man, there's just no sense. There's no sense in trying to, understand it.
I feel the same way sometimes, but I mean, to your broader point, I mean, the way I see it is there's just a continuum. If you get try to get somewhere on this instrument, it's important that you don't smash it on the table. But it's important that you you really have to study bass. You really have to study guitar, which wasn't horrible for me because I came from a real guitar-centric background,
right?
Surrounded by great guitar and guitar players all the time. But you have to understand drums as well. You really have to understand, and you have to do a really deep dive into all of those different things. So it's part of a continuum. In terms of like 6-string guitar, it's not a technical, it's so technically, it's half, I don't know if you put numerical values on it, but it's just not as difficult as this technically. And
no way.
It's much easier to play in tune. It's much easier to just play. And in an organ situation, which I've listened to so many organ records and base a lot of what I do on this from that, I kind of know what's the appropriate position to be in. And, you know, it's like, oh, okay, so now I'm playing like solos, and it's much easier to do it. It's a whole thing I don't even do on this instrument because it's just too hard in many ways. But it's been great. And, you know, also playing bass, just playing regular bass on records, which I do a lot for people, is because my only agenda is just like, how do I do what's appropriate for this situation, you know?
Yeah.
And if it, you know, and the same with drums, just like, okay, I got good time and a good feel, we'll put the click on. I'm not going to play any fills or anything, but I'm going to give you enough for, maybe I'll play through the whole tune, or maybe you'll get enough for 4 bars, and that's appropriate for right now. So it's all part of a continuum, you know, and the less intense I get about this instrument, the better I sound when I come to play it. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
because
man.
I'm expecting less from it. For instance, this Kurt Elling record that I had the fortune to kind of be a part of and produce.
Yeah, tell me about that.
Well, I went up to Richmond, Virginia. There's this band I really love now called Butcher Brown. Great bunch of guys and great players individually and as a band. And originally, you know, Brian, who's Kurt's manager, approached me like, hey, we would love you to produce Kurt's next record. You know, it'd be great if it could be a kind of a funkier thing with, you know, some more of that vibe on it. And I was like, okay, well, it's like I don't have to do this stuff. Like I'm doing this because I want to. So I'm going to tell you how I'd want to do this, you know. It's a band in Richmond, Virginia. I want to just record them and then put Kurt on it later because of COVID. We couldn't, you know, to travel. This was like in October, so it was really at the height. And I didn't want to play on it. I just wanted to produce it. But they were like, no, we want you to play on it. So I was okay, you know, it's not a chore because I love playing with those guys. So Corey Fonville, who's a fantastic drummer, and DJ Harrison, who's a great keyboard player. He actually also plays with Mike Taylor locally. He comes down to his Golden Messenger guy. He plays with him a bunch.
I got you.
But, you know, DJ, he also is an incredible drummer and producer, and you know, so we just went and played, the 3 of us, wrote a ton of stuff, and then I took it to a studio in Champaign-Urbana, Illinois, and we were there for 2 weeks. Kurt put his vocals on it, and we mixed everything. But I didn't take any solos on my instrument on that at all. I just was laying it down with the guys. And to me, there's nothing more satisfying on this instrument than doing that, than just laying it down, comping, laying down the bass and comping the guitar at the same time. Simple parts working together that have a good feel. You know, that's very gratifying. And like I said, when I'm doing this right, you don't notice.
Now, when you were cutting that, were you were cutting that with the intention that vocals were going to be added?
Yep.
Right?
Yeah.
So you kind of knew. The one thing, I mean, not the one thing, but a lot of what I watch you do is I watch you know what not to do. And,
well, hopefully.
And where to, and
hopefully 75% of the time.
Right, all right, well, I'm saying, but to also where to leave pockets, like working with a singer, like how to work with a singer. Like, this is not my time to show off. Like, you're talking about doing a whole record of literally no solos, you know, no like, hey, look at me, because you're making this bed for this singer.
Yeah. You know? And also the look at me sections with that record is just the groove. It's just sometimes we lay into grooves that are just so disgusting. It's just like, any solo over this is just dumb. Why
Right.
bother?
I know, right?
It'll just detract from the grease and the dirtiness, you know?
Okay, so let's go backwards about your guitar, because one thing we talked about earlier is I was going to ask you, I want to know where and in time where this clicked in your head to go like, okay, because I take it that you were a guitar player and you basically you basically knew how to walk your bass lines on 6-string guitar and comp and all this on that. Mm-hmm. And then where does that idea come into your head to say, I want an instrument to where half of it, because it's not as if this instrument is tuned like a standard guitar and just the bottom 3 strings are bass strings. That's not there's literally like 3 strings of a bass on your 6-string, and 3 strings of a guitar,
more or less, yeah,
right.
Yeah.
But they're not. But so essentially, because it is 3 and 3 on that.
Yeah,
one,
it's
right?
3 and 3.
Okay.
When I played 7, it was 3 and 4, and 8 was 3 and 5. But really the same thing. And as I got older, I just realized like, well, I don't want or need that much guitar range. It's just getting in the way, and it just makes me think, oh, now I have to play something nifty.
Right.
You know what I mean? And then now that I'm playing a lot of regular old 6-string guitar with people, I just get that urge out and I do it. And I come to this instrument and it's just, I don't have that need anymore.
Right.
You know, so I can get down to brass tacks.
So where did that come in with this thing with the 2, because it's got 2 outputs on it.
Yeah.
One goes to a bass amp, one goes to a guitar amp. So explain where in your brain that clicked and where that idea came about.
Sure. Okay. Well, it's kind of, again, it's a long, slow process, long kind of evolution. I mean, it started as a street musician. I was really into Joe Pass and Tuck Andrus, people who did a lot of that very self-contained way of playing guitar, you know? And I studied the hell out of that. And I got pretty proficient at that style. I hadn't quite developed anything of my own on it yet. I mean, I think even when you're a kid, you do have your own touch and your own kind of sound, but it takes you a while to develop out from your kind of idols, from the people that you learn the most. It takes a while to develop out of that into what you're going to be,
right?
You know? And I was a street musician in Europe for like 3 or 4 years. And I got back to, at one point I was just like, okay, I need to go back to California. I went to junior college at Laney in Oakland, which was great to learn arranging and all of just that kind of stuff. There's a guy named Elvo Damonte there who just was a fantastic teacher of theory and arranging. I mean, this is a junior college, and it was fantastic. And the guy named Ed Kelly, who's a brilliant pianist and organist, also you could learn from. A great community of people. So I went there to learn more, and then I realized, like, man, I've been playing a lot of bass and a lot of guitar and drums, and I was like, I really want to take this to another level with the low end. And because I was a street musician and I always wanted to be self-contained and self-sufficient and be able to make it, if you threw me out on the street, I'd be fine. You know what I mean? No problem. I'll be good, you know?
Yeah.
And then I heard about, okay, so people do, this is like 1989, right? These instruments don't really exist. There was a 7-string because of George Van Epps, who was kind of the guy, Van Epps and the Pizzarellis did a lot of this kind of 7-string where they would put a low A on the instrument. But Brazil has a 7-string guitar, but it's tuned differently and used for a whole different purpose, more of like playing kind of trombone-style lines with chords on top within specific Brazilian music. But the guitar didn't really exist. There was like a Gretsch George Van Epps model in LA at the time for $2,000. And I was in Northern California. It's like, I don't have $2,000.
Might as well have been $2 million.
I can't
at that
do that.
time.
Yeah, for a guy that was just a street musician who was like working like as a furniture mover. It's like, I don't have that money. So Subway Guitars in Berkeley, which is a real kind of a hub of a lot of, social activism and guitar and culture. There was a guy, they had Fat Dog's the name of the guy who runs the place, had an old Vega guitar, archtop guitar that was cheap and had a really wide neck on it. And so they took it and turned it into a 7-string for me. And that was the first one that I had.
Okay.
I played that for, I think, a year, maybe 2 years. And then probably a couple years, and I got very proficient at that tuning with the regular guitar, but with a low A on it.
So it was basically six guitar strings tuned normal,
and then
the low string, instead of being a B, it was an A.
It's an A.
Okay.
Yeah. And I got pretty good at that tuning. In fact, that Les Claypool record is that tuning. The record I made for Led
is it that guitar?
Some of the tracks, yeah. But then I met a guy named Ralph Novak, who I knew through my mom because she repaired guitars, and he was kind of like the guy in the Bay Area because he'd come from New York, and he was kind of like the badass luthier guy. And he had started to reinvestigate this Renaissance concept of frets that were fanned, because so much goes into guitar, right? It's not just the scale length itself. It's not just the string gauge. It's both of those things, right? So I think in the Renaissance, they were really limited with the strings. They just guts, famously, especially as you get high, famously impossible to intonate. So I think the way they got around that was they had this compensated fret thing where the lower you go, the longer the string gets. But Ralph really took that to an entirely other level with all the math that he did. And he told me, hey, what you're doing, I think I could make you a really cool guitar that would actually work a lot better. So he made me the first one I had. I don't even remember what the scale lengths were on it, honestly. But
one of the really crazy ones, or was this like an archaic version of what became those Novak guitars?
Was pretty close.
That's cool.
Yeah, it was not that.
And was that the first one that he had ever made with that fan fret concept?
With 7, no, because he was making fan fret guitars, but he was making. Because again, Leo Fender is such a genius that everyone is addicted to what he did, because it's hard to improve on that in terms of an electric guitar. But what he did was he was making retrofitted necks for Strats and Tellys that had the fan frets with an accompanying bridge.
I had no idea. That's crazy.
Yeah, and you remember Jordan Rose, who came here and played, the great drummer? So he plays with a guy named Joe Louis Walker, and Joe Louis Walker was one of the first guys to play one of Ralph's guitars.
Really?
Yep. And
but isn't he more like he's not like a jazz guy, is he?
No, he'd play anything, really, but at that time, he just loved the way they felt. But it wasn't an extreme fan. The Strats and Tellys that Ralph made were maybe like 26 to 25, maybe it was 1-inch fan, but it makes a difference.
But it basically elongated the top scale as opposed to...
Yeah, the lower string gets longer, more surface area. Right, just like a piano.
Gotcha.
So anyway, he made me that guitar, and it was a Telly, thin line Telly body, not unlike this, with a Bartolini pickup that could be split 4 and 3, and 2 outputs on it. And that's the guitar that I played when I was in Hypocrisy, and I played it on that Les Claypool, the record I made with Les Claypool.
That's cool.
Now, as time went on, I kept wanting to push it a little more. And I think in some ways I kind of made a mistake in going with the 8th string, because I wanted it to have like full bass and guitar range.
Now, at this time, with the other ones that you're talking about moving from to this 8-string thing, did those have 2 outputs?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Was that your thing, or was that his thing, or a combination of both?
I just said I wanted to do something that had 2 outputs, because I was doing so much with just a trio, and I needed a bass amp and a guitar amp.
Okay.
To accomplish it. He just made it happen, and then we've kind of been improving, because I've spent so many years kind of R&D'ing this stuff on a nightly basis, and the stuff we're making at Hybrid now is really like, we kind of have nailed it. But basically, like, Ralph set the groundwork for all of this stuff with the fan frets, and we still pay him a royalty for the
that's
the fan,
so cool.
even because he deserves it,
That's so cool.
Because he started the whole thing, but yeah, really. Then I started doing that 8-string thing, which is the instrument I played on those Blue Note records, and in some ways, I wish that I had stayed with the original 7 tuning because it just would have made things a little easier. But I think when you're young, you really want to just be like, you want to be king of shit mountain no matter what, you know? So I figured only put as many strings as I can on this. And
you got to push it, man.
We'll see what happens.
And the thing is, when you did, and the other thing too, like talking about like just the 2 outputs, because I'm thinking all the mechanics of the guitar, you know, and all this is like, it wasn't just slapping 2 outputs on it. I mean, he had to split the pickups. I mean, I'm sure that was massive.
It's been a real tricky thing. And through the years, the pickups have been the trickiest, in some ways, the trickiest aspects. I mean, getting scale lengths right is tricky too, because, and where you have the perpendicular fret, there's so many things that go into it. I'm not a math guy at all. I have other people do the killing. You know what I mean? But
but totally.
Basically, I realized that if you have more than a 3-inch differential between the lowest and the highest string, you're going to run into issues with intonation. Not because the guitar is on paper, it's perfectly intonated. Perfectly is in quotes because that's meaningless actually.
Right.
But well, you have to have, if you get like a 4-inch fan or whatever, you kind of have to have, I think you have to have like 4-wheel drive fingers to be able to execute. But this is great. This is like a 2.5 inch, and then the long scale one is like a 3-inch. And I think 3 is about as much as you can get away with. And the other crazy thing is, if I had gone with a higher string instead of a lower string and taken a more Lenny Bro kind of approach, it would have been much easier because, as you know, as an engineer, the lower you go, the more wattage you need, the more surface area you need, the more problematic things become. The sound waves get much larger, actually physically bigger, which cause...
And they just eat up bandwidth.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, you know, what's funny is like...
Which I like. And I know you're like a bass guy too, right?
Sure.
So it's just like... cram all the bass you can to everything, you know, and then you get the record and you're kind of like, ooh, that might be too much bass.
Exactly,
but
you know.
I see what you're saying.
But this is like, look, the difference between, let's say, if you have a high E string at 25.5, the difference between a 25.5 and 26.5 E string is massive.
Oh, yeah.
The difference between a 30-inch low E string and a 31-inch low E string is negligible. Do you see what I'm saying? Because as you understand, it's exponential as you go down, right?
Yeah.
So to get that, you'd really have to go like from 30 to 32 or 33 even, you know, to feel that enough of a difference to make it feel like, oh, okay, this is
well,
really
and you guys are
on.
dealing with that instrument, and I didn't really realize it until, you know, we had done a lot of stuff in here, and then, you know, you kind of like watching you play this stuff, even from a layman's standpoint, is mind-numbing, but from a, you know, guitar player, you know, not touting myself as a guitar player, but from a guitar player standpoint, watching this and trying to decode it, and then realizing like slowly how the instrument works, like, oh, okay, here's how this works and here's how these strings are tuned. The one thing that never comes into play in my head until you explained it to me was the tension on this thing.
Yeah.
You know, is that your tension on that neck, like you can only tune it to, you know, you can tune it to a certain thing, and then you're dealing with the string height, and then your intonation, no matter how much you mathematically calculate, it goes out the window if your string height is like that. Because
which mine is. You know, my action is insane. But it's because I really like a lot of resistance on a guitar, and I'm trying to get myself used to not having that, to try to get a lighter touch so I'm not working as hard.
Yeah.
But but you can honestly, you could tune this to anything. Like we strung it up with a set of 10s, and it sounds great as a 6-string guitar because it's a great set of scale lengths for that. As a baritone, it's killer.
Now, can you set it? You guys have it set to where you can just have it one output and it's just a guitar pickup. That's cool.
You switch it and it can be just a guitar.
That's very cool.
Yeah, chill.
Okay, man. So you have you've actually just released, well, not Sam, you and Sam's scenario have released a record, but you and Lucy have a record that we did in here last January.
Yep.
That it was one of there's this weird COVID blackout, from stuff that I did that was right up against the edge of it. That I literally just did a thing last night with a percussion ensemble that I recorded in here probably 4 weeks after you guys were in here.
Oh, really?
And they're just now releasing
it. Yeah.
And so there's this whole thing of records that were done, not just in here, but everywhere, that are going to be released now because of, everything kind of coming back online, and you can do some, you can do a little bit of at least promotion for it if you can't tour for it, and all that. So talk to me about that record and your, and like the playing scenario that you have with Lucy.
Yeah. Well, we had been on the road for a couple years, and most of it was with Doug Belote, great drummer who was here. And then Miwi La Lupa, incredible bass trumpeter and singer. He also plays, I think, bass guitar with that guy, Connor Oberst. I think he plays with him. And Miwi's just bad. And then Deshaun played on it as well, Deshaun Hickman, which he's a great local steel player, and in the sacred steel tradition that my friends, the Campbell brothers, are also obviously the elder statesmen of at this point. And so, we just were, all right, let's do what we been doing on the road. Let's make this record. And so we did. And then, Lucy and I had a lot of gigs that, like everyone else, just were canceled. And it really changed the trajectory of everything, because I'm not going to go on the road doing that anymore, because I realized it just doesn't make any sense for me to physically haul my ass out on the road like we were talking about earlier and doing it. So we just kind of came to the conclusion that, let's see what happens. And then Lucy is really the one who's doing all the heavy lifting with getting the record out there. Yeah. Because she lives in Europe now. She lives in Rotterdam, and she's just taken it upon herself really to do everything that needs to be done. So singles are going to start to come out in another month, I think, for the album. And it's really good. It's a really great record, but I just don't have the wherewithal to do that kind of touring anymore behind my own project, even if it is a partnership with someone like Lucy, who totally pulls her weight on the road as well. You know what I mean? But I still just don't have that right now. Maybe in 2 or 3 years I'll be able to get back to that, and I think I have maybe 10 of my own gigs scheduled for all of 2021, which at this point I'm okay with.
Now, what scenario will those gigs consist of?
No idea.
No idea.
I have no idea.
But they're billed under your name.
Yeah. I'll find some people to play with. And we'll play some songs, and it'll be fun.
So it's funny, because I look back, if you go look for a new Charlie Hunter record, it's a lot of what you do is collaboration. Yeah. And a lot of what you've recently done is collaboration. It's not just your name. It's not just Charlie Hunter and here's the new Charlie Hunter record. But I didn't even really think about this ahead of time. But when will we see a new Charlie Hunter record just under your name?
Well, I put one out, this patent and percussion thing I did in my own little shed.
Right. That's right.
But honestly, it's going to be, you know what? No, actually, there's one coming out May 31st. I did a record with my then band with George Slepik on drums and Michael Blake on saxophones.
Yes.
We did a thing in Memphis at this Memphis Music Mansion. We never released it. This is going almost 4 years ago. Never released it because we ate some food the night before, and all of us got salmonella.
No.
We were sick as dogs when we recorded it. But I have it all mastered, mixed, and it's going to be coming out May 31st.
Okay.
On the streaming. I'm not putting out vinyl or CDs or any hard copies, because it's just, again, it's impossible.
You got a tour to sell them.
Yeah, you got a tour to sell them, and even then, you're still oftentimes find yourself coming out of pocket. I mean,
and looking at the industry, were you guys just doing as far as physical merchandise? Because it's so funny, man. Because it's we have a couple of new vehicles in my family that don't have CD players, and so you get to the point where it's funny because vinyl is does that seem to be the only physical thing that you guys would take out on the road to sell? Besides T-shirts, but
at
music.
This point, yeah. Which is interesting. I mean, that's what we grew up buying, vinyl. And,
it's crazy.
And it's a thing. I mean, the thing about vinyl, especially for our kids' generation is its permanence. It denotes permanence, and it denotes a continuum and a connection to them with previous generations.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And especially if they like the old music. Like, for instance, my daughter, she's 18, I bought her a little all in kind of self-contained record player.
I did the same thing with Abraham.
And I gave her all of my old records, my mom's old records. So she's got this really cool collection of records. And
That's
I
cool.
was just like, I want to see what happens, because she's not like a really super technical person. But she just immediately took to it. Every night she's just putting on records. It's a different experience.
It's a totally different experience to put it on and to, like I say, both my boys have turntables now. I say turntables, same thing, self-contained.
Yeah.
To where if you want to hook up an external speaker, you can. You flip the top and it's like the old record players. When we were kids, they have a handle on them like a suitcase.
Yeah.
But the crazy thing is the vinyl now will sell and have no problem with a brand new release, $29. I think the record player costs like $70.
Exactly. It can.
Right?
Those ruin your records, though. Apparently what I've heard, the cartridges on those are kind of rough on records. But it's an expensive process. It's like an early 20th century process too,
man.
It's not, I think really those 78s were different. I think this vinyl process goes back to the 1940s, but I may be wrong about that. But yeah, it's very resource intensive.
Oh yeah,
and
I know with my kids, with the mechanics of it, it's pretty cool because little things from when I was a kid listening to records on whatever stereo we had or whatever.
Yeah.
And the things like they would turn the volume down, and then you can, if you put your ear up to it, you can still hear the sound coming out of the groove with the needle on it.
Yeah,
and just seeing my kids, seeing my son go, "Can you hear that?" It's like I already know that. I experienced that when I was younger than him, but seeing that all kind of happen again is kind of like, it's kind of cool. It's very cool. It's very cool to watch him, to watch him do that. But vinyl is a thing again.
Yeah, and there's I had to figure out a way during this pandemic, like I have to figure out what to do with these 3,000 or 4,000 CDs that I have. Of all the different bands, all the different things. It's like I have to find someone so they don't just end up in a dump, but they'll probably just end up in a dump, unfortunately.
Yeah.
I don't think they can be recycled. Luckily, most of them were digipacks, so not jewel cases. You're not dealing with that kind of horrible waste,
right? Like plastic and stuff. Like that,
but yeah, man. And again, it was just now we're at this vinyl, and vinyl, is really a great medium. It does a thing. It does a real specific thing to the music that our ears really like.
Yeah, man.
And there's the experience, but being a musician and having to deal with carrying boxes of vinyl in and out of your car and it's a lot of work to get it made as a singular entity. If you're a record company or whatever, then you're fine. That's what you're doing. But for the independent people, it's tricky. So I think we may just be down to selling T-shirts, which I've never sold anyway because I'm very uncomfortable with the idea of putting my name on a T-shirt and having somebody else wear it. It seems absurd. I just find it absurd. I mean, I like the concept of like a band name or something.
The fact that you're standing here with like 3 cameras around you now is kind of like, it's funny to me because I'm like, I know that's just not you being cool. Like, hey, let's sell me. That's
we're
not
just
your
talking,
thing.
It's awesome, but I mean, it just is weird. Like, oh yeah, you got a picture of this corny ass dude on your shirt. This guy, like, yeah, okay,
dude, that's hilarious, man. Well, is there anything else that you want to promote or talk about while you're here?
Yeah, the thing that I'm doing with Darren now that we did. We recorded a couple of the things here.
We did a lot. We did a lot of stuff for you to take. And manipulate. So no telling where.
One of them is going to be one of his singles, and we just put the first single up it's going to be released May 14th.
Cool.
And he's just it's been a pleasure, and he's writing great stuff, and I'm super excited.
And with all these things that we're talking about, I'm going to go back and post and try to put
okay, great.
Try to put Instagram handles of all the stuff that you're working on, so
cool.
They kind of flash up, and I'm going to kind of figure out how to do all that stuff, when I get into video post-production land, which is a new thing for me. But
hey,
So
Fuck it, you in for a penny or in for a pound, motherfucker.
That's exactly right. That's
Totally.
exactly right. And today I told Charlie to bring a piece of gear, and he brought his hybrid.
Yeah.
And so today I'm going to pimp these Stedman pop screens because they have gotten me through the pandemic seriously.
Those are killer.
Yeah.
You gave me one of those too.
Yeah, I did. And
I
the crazy
use it.
thing about them is if you look at them, they're all totally, let's go like this. They're all totally like, they're metal, but they're plastic coated. What's not metal is plastic coated. And I have put these on every mic that I have had to cut vocals on during this COVID thing.
And you just pour hot water over it to sterilize it.
Yeah, dude, I can wash it under the sink.
Yeah.
I can put alcohol on it. I can do anything I want. And this is one of the ones I've been using for almost a year now. Thanks to Stedman, they were very cool.
And you can kill flies with it too.
You totally can.
Yeah.
Or play a little squash.
It's badminton.
Badminton.
Yeah.
So that is the one thing today. I'm going to ask everyone to bring one thing with them
Right on.
each time that they come in. And so Charlie has his just very dope, cool guitar that you can see him playing right there. And that is Hybrid Guitars. And I want to say it's just hybridguitars.com, hybrid-guitars.
Yeah.
If you just get on the Googles and type in hybrid guitars, and that's literally, it is a hybrid guitar, but that is also the brand of the guitar.
Yeah.
So if anyone is interested in those, and what is your website?
Just charliehunter.com.
charliehunter.com.
But don't go there.
But don't go there. No, because you would hate to see a picture of him. There's
Read a book.
Read a book. Read a book. So thanks to you guys for watching. Thank you to Charlie. See, what did I tell you? Told you it was going to be a cool episode, right? Cool and super, super groovy. You know why? Because this is Conversations in Groove. Check it out on our Earthtones official YouTube channel and on all of your podcast apps. I'm Benji Johnson. I am your host, and I will be your host every week for Conversations in Groove live right here from Earthtones Recording Studio.